All right. So, this is kind of a last minute episode. Um, my apartment is pretty much empty right now. I have some news before we get into the book review, but I am moving to Austin. So, it's pretty unreal, if I'm being honest. I've been trying to move to Austin for probably the last 5 years and put in a lot of work to try and make this happen. And I just got really lucky recently and got an incredible job offer that I have accepted. And I can't really be more thankful right now. it's kind of crazy. So it's been a while since I've been able to do an episode because I've had so many moving parts in my life. But for a while now, I've kind of struggled with the motivation to, I guess, do more music stuff and be excited about music again. And I feel like I've finally found that. And so this whole move to Austin has just reignited my love for music, and I'm getting more and more excited each day that passes. So thank you to my family and everyone else who has, supported me and been rooting for me, even if we don't talk much or anything. So, yeah, I'm really just thankful and excited right now. It's if you're curious, I mean, I'm working for an apartment complex, kind of doing what I'm doing now, except this time around I'll be managing a team of about 7 employees, and it'll be much less strain on my body. I'll just have to help the employees and place orders for parts and schedule contractors and things of that nature. So the property is beautiful. It's really nice. It's in South Austin, just 10 minutes away from the city. And I couldn't be happier. It's still kind of unreal, the deal that I'm getting. My apartment there is only going to cost me $25 a month for a 2-bedroom. So it's incredible. I'm getting, like a $8 raise, $7 raise. It's crazy. But I'm very happy and I'm very excited. So that's why I haven't been able to make a video in quite a while. Now, the book that I'm going to review is a book that I finished actually probably about 3 months ago or 2 months ago. It's called The Wolf Age. It's about the fall of the Vikings. And I'm going to talk more about the cultural things that I learned from this book because it was absolutely fascinating. So the book starts around the year like 850, and I'm doing this from the top of my head, so just bear with me since it's been a while since I've read the book. But it starts around 850 and it goes until about 1200 AD. And the book actually starts with the biggest uniting king for the Vikings passing away. It's kind of relatively unknown as to what disease he had, but he was getting older, and he came down with some illness. And his name was Swen Forkbeard, and he essentially united all of the Nordic regions of the Vikings. And whenever he passed away, there quickly became a power struggle between a lot of the tribes within the kingdom. Notably, there was a king named Olaf Haraldsson, and the other one. There's a timeline in here I'm gonna find real quick, so bear with me. It's like a chronology here. Let me find what page it's on in the table of contents. Afterward illustrations. Chapter overview. Chronology 333. Okay. So, I'm sorry, Harold Bluetooth was the name of the king. And he passes away, and then quickly there is a power grab that goes until the mid to late 900s between Hakon Sigurdsson and some other warring tribes. And so King Edward at the time was the king of King of England, and he ends up being murdered, and then this other king, Alfred, I can't really pronounce his name, he takes over as king in 978 AD. So from 978, there's a struggle between Hakon Sigurdsson and Harold Bluetooth and his descendants. And then Harold Bluetooth is killed during a rebellion in 987. And then Swen Forkbeard establishes himself as the new king, and then they continue to raid England throughout this period. And Swen Forkbeard essentially establishes dominance of England after about 50 years. And by the early thousands, Swen Forkbeard and Olaf Tryggvason have this really big battle for power for the Danish kingdom. And by the end of that, Olaf Tryggvason is killed. Eric Haakson takes over the ancestral lands that Olaf Tryggvason resides over, and then there now is a new sort of order in Norway as a result of that. And then from there, I'm going to skip a little bit further, but Olaf Haraldsson joins Swin Forksbeard's army, and this is where a lot of like the dynamic of the culture starts to shift. And I'm going to get back to the culture now. So the Vikings were a culture based off of very strong mythologies, and they some of like it kind of varied from tribe to tribe a little bit. There wasn't necessarily like one, I guess, mythology that they all subscribed to. It was kind of stories passed down generations of previous Viking warriors, and they were put into a mythology. As far as I understood it, that's sort of how it played out. And during this time period, whenever Olaf Haraldsson joins forces with Swin Forkbeard, the continent of the UK has been raided consistently by the Vikings for 100 years at this point, through Harold Bluetooth and then the other monarch that died before him, where the book starts in 850 AD. And so the culture of England at this point is a Christian-based culture, okay? And the thing about England geographically and economically is that they were very rich in gold and silver. So they had a level of wealth that the Vikings had never really seen before, which is why they continued to raid. But the English were unable to defend themselves against the Vikings purely because the Vikings had developed ships that were able to allow them to travel to and along the coast of the continent very easily. It was something that England was not really prepared for. And so whenever they would go into a town in England, their method was to go in and essentially persuade the town to surrender. And there's usually a lord who acts like a governor of the town or a mayor of the town that is part of a nobility. And if they surrender, then what happens is they will not wage destruction on the town. But most of the time, the nobility raises armies to try to fight off the Vikings, and that becomes very devastating for them and costly, not only to their nobility, since it's a very hereditary and honorable thing that's closely connected to the Christian culture, or the Christian religion. And so what causes a lot of issues for the new king of England, Althred, I really can't pronounce that name, I'm sorry. He becomes wildly unpopular because he allows the sieges of these towns to continue and leaves the governors amongst themselves to defend their particular towns. And so the Vikings just keep moving further and further in to a lot of the major cities in England at the time, like Wessex, and it becomes a very difficult thing for Alfred as a king to maintain public unity and keep his public image intact. And as all of this is happening over the course of about another 50 years, he ends up having a child out of wedlock, and it's the only son that he has, because I believe his other son dies at a pretty young age, and this becomes an issue later in the history of the Vikings, because after Olaf Tryggvason is killed, Eric Hakkonson ends up reclaiming the throne and taking over the role of Swin Forkbeard, essentially. And the kingdom of the Vikings is now starting to become more centralized in England, because Olaf Haraldsson, who he starts as a very young age. He becomes kind of a prominent figure through these raids that he does with Olaf Tryggvason, and he kind of with Swin Forkbeard. And so Olaf Haraldsson builds a name for himself under Swin Forkbeard. And so after Swin Forkbeard is essentially killed in a siege, Olaf Haraldsson, this young protege, I believe he starts fighting in the English raids at the age of 17, becomes essentially this leader that has a cult following behind him. He's not really a king yet or anything. He's challenging Olaf Tryggvason, and eventually defeats Olaf Tryggvason and becomes sort of the de facto king of the Vikings, but has now become the wealthiest Viking after successfully raiding England over and over and over again. And Alfred of England just pays and pays Olaf to just stop raiding because he's so successful. And so now you have a split, because there's dissenters in the Nordic regions, where a large majority of the Vikings occupy, and this new, essentially rising star in that region is a man by the name of Canute. C-N-U-T. So, and he starts at a young age and essentially challenges Olaf for power, and then starts to perform raids on England, and not only has a lot of the Nordic and Danish regions behind him as, their military leader. But now he's challenging Olaf in the English region. So Canute ends up becoming even more powerful than Olaf Haraldsson. And he ends up like essentially taking over the raids of England, and they have a few battles against each other, but Canute's popularity in the way that he essentially is generous with his soldiers and with his public image, he ends up becoming a master negotiator, which is something that Olaf Haraldsson doesn't really ever like work out. He's really good at military tactics and just brute force, but a lot of Olaf's own men start to slowly turn on him because Olaf has no problems executing dissenters essentially against his power, whereas Canute tries to essentially negotiate power struggles within the Danish kingdom. And so Canute ends up bleeding Althridge like dry. Like he ends up exhausting all of his resources by around 1023. And so around 1023, 1025, Olaf and Canute are starting to really ramp up their military struggle against each other. And something that's very interesting to note is that Canute integrates himself into English society and adopts Christianity, and a lot of the Viking followers of him that now reside in England actually end up being placed as nobles within the English system after Canute drives out Althridge from the region essentially as king and takes the throne of England, so much so that he marries I believe one of Althridge's daughters, or I can't remember, one of his it's one of his daughters. What was her name? Her name is in here. I can't remember her name, but it's someone within his family and establishes legitimacy within England as a result of that. So, yeah, I'm not finding the name. I can't remember it right now. So anyway, so he establishes legitimacy within England and adopts Christianity wholeheartedly and actually encourages his followers to do the same. And during this war with Althridge that he has, it becomes so devastating, and a lot of Cnut's old followers who now change sides to Althridge end up switching sides again to come back onto Cnut's good side, and Cnut actually allows some of them to survive and be placed in kind of lower nobility positions with some kind of trade involved, whether it be some kind of like strategic military trade or, just payment in gold sort of a thing. But he ends up assassinating a few of them that he doesn't trust. And Cnut at this point is equally as popular as Althridge was way back whenever he first took the throne. And so his assimilation into Christianity and English culture goes so far as to him being invited to the Vatican, and Olaf Haraldsson takes that as an opportunity to try to attack Cnut and his kingdom in England. And so he's actually in the process of because there's this big like ceremonial meeting for a big marriage that happens, and I can't remember the actual marriage, but all of the kings of like Spain and France and Italy are there at this big gathering, and he ends up having to rush back to defeat Olaf Haraldsson, and Olaf Haraldsson is finally killed in this battle after they have gone back and forth for so long. And then Cnut actually travels all the way back to Norway and the Danish kingdom, and he's welcomed by everyone there because most of Olaf's men have turned their backs on him at that point. And whenever Cnut goes back there and Olaf is killed, he kind of encounters Emma of Normandy. That's who he marries. So Cnut marries Emma of Normandy. So anyways, so whenever he goes back there, a lot of the Vikings from kind of the original regions that they, existed in, start to slowly adopt Christianity. And so what's interesting about the fall of the Vikings is that by the time Cnut dies, the true fall of the Vikings has more to do, I think, with the assimilation into English culture and nobility and Christianity. And in Viking society, poems were the most affluent way to prove status, because literacy was so difficult back then. And so most of the history that we know from the Vikings comes from a lot of these poems and stories that are told. There are some documents from the times in England whenever there were changes of nobility and things of that nature, that we can kind of see how social ties and alliances were brought together. But around 850, whenever the original king of the Vikings around that time period that had united that culture passes away, the slow assimilation of Christianity over generations of Vikings successfully raiding and killing lots of English citizens ends up being the thing that kind of slowly dissolves the status of the Vikings, interestingly enough. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One, it was that the Vikings operated as tribes that were somewhat nomadic. Like, there were tons of Viking tribes along the coast of France and Spain, and then you had the majority of them located in the Danish regions in Norway and like Scandinavia. And so by the time they started to move to England and adopt this culture of Christianity heavily, they essentially became integrated into the regions in which they were living in through Christianity. And whenever Canute died, he was like the last Viking warrior that had any kind of traditional Viking mythology behind him and their support of him. So from that point forward, after Canute dies, the rest of the Vikings just are assimilated into Christian culture in whichever country they reside in. And that's a very interesting thing to think about, because by the time you get to 1200 AD, there's really no mentions of what we would consider, traditional Vikings that you see depicted in movies and TVs and things like that. So overall, a very interesting book. I apologize that I jumped around a lot and that I probably might have missed or got some of the facts wrong for this. I've just, like I said, I've been really busy interviewing for this new job and finally getting it. But I think the biggest thing whenever you read history, just in general, is that one, you enjoy it, because if you're not enjoying it, then what are you doing it for? But also that you know what happened. That's actually, in my opinion, more important than knowing like all the specific names, all the specific dates. I mean, as long as it's close and you know what happened, that's the most important thing. But it was a very interesting read, and I literally picked this up at a bookstore in Waco whenever my band was on tour last year, because I was curious and I don't know anything about the Vikings. So I learned a lot. I learned more than I think I would have. But yeah, there's all kinds of more detailed things in this book that I can kind of briefly touch on, like there were ceremonies that the Vikings performed in honor of someone within the army that died, and you were expected from a pretty young age to raise yourself up as a man in this culture to be a warrior and contribute to society in that way. The whole reason why the Vikings raided, more specifically, is that a lot of the regions that they lived in, they had very long winters, and they couldn't really grow much, and they couldn't, killing animals was difficult in the wintertime. And so in order to survive the long winters in the majority of the regions where the Vikings lived, they essentially had to steal and raid and gain wealth in order to survive in their main region. So geography kind of had a lot to do with it too. I think that's really the biggest thing I learned from reading this book, because we kind of ask ourselves, I think, historically, how is it that the Vikings could essentially take over the Kingdom of England, and then the Kingdom of England still survive past that and returned essentially to being hereditary Anglo-Saxon in the remaining years of their history and into cultural and international dominance of the world. And I really think geography had a lot more to do with it than anything else. They just happened to live in an area and occupy an area where gold and silver existed, and they had a very organized structure through Christianity to collectively unite the English citizens together under a nobility, and they were able to survive even through the Vikings dominating them and then becoming part of their aristocracy for several generations, as a result of kind of that deep-rooted cultural collectivist Christianity structure, and pragmatically the demand for gold and silver throughout Europe. So yeah, very interesting book. And I would say you could look at the Vikings in one of two ways. You could say they were primitive in a lot of ways, but the primitive side became civilized through Christianity and they had an intellectual, poetic ability to articulate as they became more and more assimilated into Christianity and English culture and the structure of nobility within England. So I think that maybe some of the movies and shows that you see depicting the Vikings might actually be pretty accurate as to how they might have been, which is kind of rare, honestly. I mean, I feel like a lot of historical movies and shows get a lot of things wrong, but that's one that does a really good job. I think Game of Thrones is also really good about using history in kind of a fictional sense accurately. Like a lot of the things that I've seen in Game of Thrones, I'm like, yeah, that actually happened in, English history or in, French history. Like that kind of stuff actually went on. So anyways, yeah, so that's the book review, and I'm gonna be restructuring the podcast to do more music stuff just because I'm feeling more excited about it. So I would also like to have guests on the show. So even if you're a DFW musician or something, if you want to come down to Austin after I move and do a podcast, it would be really fun. I think it would be great. So yeah. Thanks for all the support, and next time I make a video, I'll be in Austin.